All set. All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the special meeting on November 14th, rescheduled from November 21st for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Planning Commission's Planning Committee. We are meeting at the Government Center in room 266 this evening. This meeting is also being live streamed on the Planning, Design, and Development YouTube page. We'll jump straight into it. Do I need to go back? Okay. We'll jump straight into it. We'll start with introductions with our planning commissioners. We're going to start with Commissioner Gaston on my left, and there are microphones above us, but you don't have to look up on them. So we'll start with the introduction, starting with Commissioner Gaston.
Melissa Gaston, Commissioner. Erin Shaw, Planning Commission.
Robert Stewart, Commissioner, Planning Commission.
Courtney Rhodes, Planning Commission, Vice Chair. Teresa McDonald, Planning Commission.
And then we'll do also for everyone around the room. Ed, we'll start with you, and then we'll come around the outside this way.
Sure. Ed McKinney with the City of Charlotte.
Julian Burton, City of Charlotte, Department of Transportation. Todd Alum, City of Charlotte, Economic Development.
Malia Spokes John, City of Charlotte Economic Development.
Bob Sorrell with CMS.
Dennis Terry, Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools.
Erlen Brown, CMS.
Jason Pauling, and
And Bethany Fritz, County Real Estate. Erin Henson, planning staff. Kathy Cornett, planning staff.
Zania Duhaney, Planning Staff.
Thank you. And I am Andrew Blumenthal. I'm very happy to be the chair of the planning committee. As we move forward next, hopefully everyone has had a chance to review the minutes from our last meeting on October 17th. If there's any discussion, please let us know. And if not, we will entertain a motion to approve.
This is Commissioner Gaston. I make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from October 17th, 2023. Second.
Second by Commissioner McDonald. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We have several interesting mandatory referrals this month. I know there were some questions around the dais. Before we get into that, is there anything that anyone would like to pull for further conversation? Okay, great. Commissioner McDonald, I know you had a few questions, and it sounds like all of our representatives are here. If there's somebody as far as that goes.
Yes, this is Teresa McDonald. I had a general question. As I was looking at these properties under consideration in the county purchases, just maybe it's a technical question. Looking, I was using Polaris, but wondering if there was an easy way or how you guys might look at what's in proximity, or if there was any data. I kind of was looking at it, wishing that I had an idea how many rooftops there were around these locations, or what other amenities were within a certain distance. And I thought that was key to my understanding of some of these purchases, but I hope that's a sensible question that somebody can answer.
Would that be directed, or would there in particular, would that be, CMS, would that be Parks and Rec, in terms of a specific petition that you're referencing?
I think it is more so when it comes to parks, and just trying to get a sense of. Yeah. Some of those were parks.
Sort of a similar question, but the greater context of
Yeah,
that,
the context.
the proposal is kind of like, we want to do this, but we don't see the full vision for why we're going to expand this park, or provide this, or sell this for school. What's the larger context around the park?
Yeah, that is good.
Was it related to schools?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy to address that. So Dennis LeCare with CMS. So unlike the city and the county, CMS doesn't have taxing authority. So when we go to the public for bonds for school construction, not for our administrative needs. We're building 2 bus garages right now because Mecklenburg County was nice enough to give us some funding for that. But we haven't built new administrative office space since 1992. All right, we have 5 refrigerated trailers plugged in Craig Avenue to keep our food cold. So we have to figure out other ways to address those capital needs that we have for our administrative and our support staff. And so this is an opportunity to convert a building that is non-performing, can't be used as a school, into something that we can use to office human beings rather than putting them in schools that we decided weren't fit for children. So that's the opportunity that's presented, and that's why we're pursuing that.
Anything else? Wish we were done on that one.
No.
Just one quick comment for me. I'm very happy to see something happening on Reagan Drive. Excited to see what that turns into. Obviously, I think there's consensus that anything is better than what's going on right now. On that note, if we're not pulling anything for additional comments, would somebody like to make a motion to approve our minutes for reports?
This is Commissioner Gaston. The planning committee reviewed mandatory referral reports 23-41, 23-42, 23-43, 23-44, 23-45, 23-46, and 23-47 on number 14, and have no additional comments for the submitting agency. Rhodes, second.
All right, so we have a motion by Commissioner Gaston, second by Commissioner Rhodes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. We're very fortunate to have Ed McKinney and Julie Barton here with us this evening with CDOT to go over the strategic mobility plan. Ed, I'll defer to you, but I believe that there's a presentation, but we would like to have a little bit more of a discussion and conversation around this. I encourage everyone to lean in and engage. And again, we appreciate you being here. I'll let you take it.
Sure, yeah, thanks. Again, Ed McKinney, Julie and I are here to share what we've been doing around the strategic mobility plan. I'll just do a quick sort of context setting, and Julie will jump into sharing some of the work, and like we can just say, well, hopefully we'll just have a conversation, share a lot of the work that we're doing, and have a dialogue. There's a lot of things going on, work in progress, so it's actually a really good time to share it with this group, the commission, and have some good feedback and discussion on it. Quick context, so we did a strategic mobility plan, sort of concurrent with the comprehensive plan, and it got adopted about a year or so after the comprehensive plan. So the council adopted the mobility plan in 2022. And so since then, kind of like the comp plan, we've been doing things to kind of build the implementation of it. And so everything you'll see from Julian tonight is kind of all the things we've been doing recently on the implementation. But I wanted to make that connection. Again, the comp plan and the mobility plan were sort of done together. And so, you know, all the goals, all the thinking and kind of vision of that are totally intertwined. The mobility plan was just sort of a deeper dive on the transportation mobility aspects of the comp plan. And it's really intended to be kind of the next step to kind of implementation, but policy, and how we invest our capital dollars in projects and mobility infrastructure. So with that, I'll throw it over to Julian to talk about the work.
Yeah, for those who don't know me, my name is Julian Burton. I work in the Strategic Mobility Division of Charlotte DOT. So we do a lot of the long-range mobility planning and policy development, and I was part of the team that worked on the strategic mobility plan that Ed's referencing. So as Ed mentioned, the strategic mobility plan was the mobility-focused aspect of a lot of the different planning efforts that we're doing in the city. I know this group is familiar with a lot of this work. Obviously, the 2040 comprehensive plan, and then that The 2040 policy map and EDO spun out of that. We also have the strategic energy action plan. And the strategic mobility plan takes bits and pieces of all of that, certainly using the comp plan as a foundation to really create a holistic vision for mobility in the city. Just to kind of highlight that connection between the SMP and the comp plan, we actually took the 5th goal out of the comprehensive plan and made that our overarching goal for the SMP. So the foundation of the whole plan is directly linked with language and policies that are embedded within the 2040 comp plan. And just to talk a little bit more about how we organize the plan and the overall vision for the plan. So we took that aspirational goal from the comp plan for safe and equitable mobility, and we carried that forward in a couple different ways. So for safe, we wanted to really advance the work we'd already been doing with Vision Zero. I'm sure everyone here is probably familiar with it to some degree. We do have a Vision Zero action plan, but the overarching goal is to eliminate traffic deaths and serious injuries for all who share Charlotte streets. So we wanted to continue to advance that and make that an integral part of everything that we're doing from a mobility perspective. We also wanted to focus on equity, and the way we framed it in the SMP is to create this aspirational goal for a 50-50 mode share. So that would mean at 2040, the year 2040, half of our commute trips would be made by means other than single occupancy vehicle. So this is an important aspect of equity, because if you're designing a city that is relying solely on single occupancy vehicle, then you're creating a barrier for everyone that does not have access or is cost prohibitive to have access to a car. So to make sure that Charlotte residents have access to their jobs, to a doctor's office, to grocery stores, to their schools, we feel like it's a really important aspirational goal to kind of strive for this 50-50 mode share. So thinking a little bit about how the plan is organized, we had several different transportation plans that we adopted over the years, including the Transportation Action Plan, Charlotte Walks, Charlotte Bikes, and so part of this effort was to consolidate all of our policies into one place. So we took all of our existing policies and elevated them into the SMP. We organized them by these 6 objectives: safe, connected, equitable, sustainable, prosperous, and innovative. And so within that, again, we consolidated, we organized everything. We also advanced policies in new ways as well. And so we really set up a great policy framework to do a lot of the work that we need to do. And one of the policy pieces that I really wanted to highlight was the streets map. So the framework or the foundation for that is in the SMP. And what this does is set a cross section for every arterial street in the city. The arterial streets are divided into 4 different classifications: parkways, boulevards, avenues, and main streets. And each cross section includes a bike facility and a pedestrian facility, and also lays out details like how many travel lanes, if there needs to be a median, etc. So this is a really important policy document for us, because this allows us to lay out how streets should be designed. So when we're thinking about capital projects, this is our starting point. This is what the street needs to include. This is the type of bike facility that needs to be included, but it's also a regulatory tool. So the UDO references the streets map, and what this does is preserves the space for future street improvements, and in some cases actually helps require improvements to those streets as well. So when developers are coming in and they're measuring their setback, they're measuring from the future back of curb on the streets map, and they're also potentially required to build the sidewalks and build the bike facilities as well. So another key piece that the SMP does is sets up a new way for us to prioritize projects going forward. So you can see here the vision and goals we've kind of discussed already. So now we've got to think about how we want to prioritize capital projects as well. So in the past, we've been relying on several different previous plans. We've been thinking about congestion, Vision Zero action plan, making sure we're getting connections, and then leveraging with our partners. But we had all these new planning efforts, so we wanted to kind of level set and start a new process for how we wanted to prioritize projects We want it to be more holistic and also incorporate a process that included more feasibility so that we could really identify the most needed projects in different areas and the most feasible projects.
Hey, Julie, can I ask a question?
Yes.
On slide 21, the sort of vision for how we want to design the streets. I think we've all seen the sidewalks that we require developers to put, and the developers sidewalks to nowhere. You know, they have to put them in front of their development, but they don't connect to anything. And I know that's practically speaking, we can't require that everything is connected. But how do you think about, you know, like the first example, the 2-lane with the bike lanes? There are lots of places where we have something like that, and then it just sort of ends. Bike lane ends is a frightening thing to see if you're on a bike.
Yeah.
How do you sort of think about how to make that less abrupt for users?
Yeah, well, I think one thing is we do realize that to get where we're going, we're going to have to rely on incremental improvements. And in some cases, that means that a bike lane is going to end. Now, if there's ways from an engineering perspective that we can make that transition happen better, I think that's something that we need to be continuing to talk about. We have another planning effort this coming year where we're going to be updating our urban street design gap. And that's the type of thing that would be more included in there. But to get to your kind of bigger question, I think generally speaking, we want to continue to show that we are improving our streets. We want to continue to show that we care about bikes, even if that means that the bike facility in its current state is not as usable or as effective as it will be one day. But we want to make sure that we're taking every opportunity that we can. There are situations where it's just such a small development that we wouldn't necessarily stripe it or make it into a bike lane because becomes an unsafe condition. But generally speaking, we do want to kind of take advantage of incremental development and incremental projects. I don't know if you have any.
As we think about the sidewalk, what the project is for sidewalks across Charlotte, a very expensive project, do we sort of think about integrating that work where we're prioritizing sidewalks in neighborhoods that don't have sidewalks with, I guess, not really with new development where they have to put in sidewalks, and sort of think about, you know, a sidewalk that runs contiguously for a mile is a lot better than 9 sidewalks that run for a mile across 9 different areas where you can't really go anywhere. Do you sort of think about those trade-offs?
Yeah, it might be getting at 2 different things. I mean, we're certainly going to want private development to put in the sidewalks whenever it's required. And then it's up to us to decide if we feel like we need to be the ones filling in the gaps or if we feel
Does that
like
get prioritized where there's now a sidewalk and now we could actually, with some investment, we could actually connect it on both ends to existing sidewalks as well?
Yes, and we have a sidewalk program that would be looking at those types of things in terms of prioritization. It's not the only thing that's looked at, but we certainly want to take advantage of opportunities to fill in sidewalk gaps to kind of make those longer stretches. Yeah. So this is backing up a little bit, thinking about how we've been kind of setting the stage for how we want to prioritize projects going forward. So we started with a very measurable and data-driven process. We took 8 different data sets. We overlaid them, overlaid them on top of each other and scored them by how many of these data sets they were meeting. And what we came up with was this map that we have affectionately called the blue blobs. But it's basically an area, it's basically showing our mobility needs based on those data sets. It's showing areas where we know there is a need for mobility improvements. And we identified over 200 of those areas, which is obviously a lot to kind of handle. So we knew we needed to simplify it from there. This was a really excellent starting point for us. And this is just kind of showing a little bit more of an example. So you can see Transportation Disadvantage Index, that's the data set we use to really elevate equity issues, and then the high injury network as well, which is elevating safety issues. So you can see how there's overlap between the blue blobs and both of those data sets. And what we wanted to do was kind of turn all these areas of needs into more defined areas and actual potential projects. So we're looking at these areas now thinking about what types of projects could we identify and fund within these areas. And so the other effort that we did kind of parallel to this is we identified every project that we had on any kind of list that had been planned for at some point. That includes all of our programs as well. So pedestrian program, bike program, traffic signals, bridge, Vision Zero. And we came up with this huge catalog of potential opportunities and projects. And so what we wanted to do was take the areas of need, take all the potential projects that we knew we had on the books, and just wanted to kind of further think through how we would organize all of that into defined areas with bundles of projects that really make a system, make a network instead of just being an individual isolated project. So this is just kind of an illustration to kind of think through all the different types of improvements that really play into a good mobility system and a good mobility network. And so at the bottom, you see the term strategic investment areas. So that's what we're really working on right now. That is about taking the mobility needs, taking these ideas of bundling projects together and trying to define exactly where that goes. And the other piece of that is not only thinking about where that goes, but then thinking about what type of project makes the most impact in those areas, in those strategic investment areas. So we want to make sure that we are thinking about the place types and how those align with the trip types. And that we make sure that our infrastructure is supporting our places. And so one type of project may be much more impactful within certain place types in the city than in others. So we need to be thinking through that as we're attempting to bundle projects and think about prioritizing projects. So I'm just going to walk through kind of a couple of examples. It's a little bit abstract, but hopefully it helps kind of give you an insight into how we're thinking about some of this. But this is neighborhood one place type, suburban growth. The infrastructure is rural. So the approach here, the types of bundles of projects here, is going to be really targeted and scalable investment. So what exactly does that look like? Well, there's new housing development, there's a park across the street. So what's the most important thing here? Well, it's going to be improving this rural road so that people can walk from their housing development to the park safely. So that might mean signalizing a pedestrian crossing at that intersection. It might mean including street lighting so that it feels safe and make sure that we have crossings everywhere. Maybe there's a shared use path connection that makes that connection across the street more valuable, and then making sure that transit improvements, as this becomes more of a destination, transit improvements are elevated as well so that people can get to other places as well. So looking at a slightly different example in University City, this is a community activity center and a campus. It's a huge regional employment center. It's obviously growing. There's a lot of housing coming in, and then there are lots of stretching, sprawling infrastructure. So the way we look at here is we just need to make connections every way we can. And so thinking through, I mean, any possibility to make a new street connection is incredibly valuable. We need to think about other ways to move around as well for smaller trips, like microtransit, like bike connections, and make sure we're supporting the county and their greenway connections as well. But really, it's just very much about connections. And so, yeah, as I said, that's a little bit abstract. Just to kind of summarize, what we're doing right now is defining those strategic investment areas throughout the city where we want to invest, and coming up with a list of bundled projects, potential projects that would really make an impact within each of those strategic investment areas. So we are hoping and planning to present the strategic investment areas and the draft list of projects to council at the retreat at the end of January. And then we are really going to get into gear with public engagement. And so that's going to be partnership, obviously, with the planning department. We really want to take advantage of the efforts in the community area plan areas and potentially other engagement efforts as well to make sure that we're aligned well and that we can get some good input on the strategic investment areas and the project bundles. And once we've gotten some feedback on that, we're going to be moving more into project feasibility, trying to see what projects are really doable, and then sending some of those to advanced planning for actual funding. So hard and fast work right now, lots going on. And before we turn it over to questions, I just wanted to let Ed kind of step back a little bit and talk about how all this plays into the regional planning efforts as well.
Sure. Before I go, I would say, kind of going back to your questions and maybe making a point about what Julie just described. What you described is something that we were trying to grapple with, which is we got lots, take sidewalks as an example, lots of gaps all over the place, and we don't have enough money to fill them within a reasonable time. So we're stuck trying to find the right way to prioritize. But then when we go back to the analysis that Julie described, if we were to layer a bunch of different needs and see where that heat map draws us, then those are strategic areas. And then in those areas, let's focus them on the little gaps and let's try to create a kind of more complete sort of system in areas that we know we've got lots of kind of overlapping needs. And so it's a slightly different way for us to kind of approach prioritization. We'll still have programs that kind of touch on needs across the city, but we really want to try to find places where if we did a handful of relatively small things, like a pedestrian crossing, filling the sidewalk gaps, and street lighting, all kind of relatively simple things, but if you do that in the right place where those needs are, actually have a really big, neighborhood community impact. So that's, I just want to put that point out there, the process of
2 + 2 = 5 with those projects.
Pardon me?
I said 2 + 2 = 5.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And so, and to go on to just another point about it is we've also recognized with limited resources, if we continue to pick large projects, you can only do a couple of them, and it takes a long time to build them. So the expectations that community has, we just can't meet because we don't have enough resources. And if we put them all in 1 or 2 large projects, you're ending up really only putting investment in certain parts of the community. And even that investment you don't realize for 10 years to actually build a large capital project. So small things we're trying to collect small things in key places we can actually feel like we could have quicker, more impactful benefit to the community. So I'll just quickly talk. So what Julian described is all the things we're doing at the city around capital investment and how council will think about prioritizing projects and using their capital dollars for this kind of investment. Concurrently, we've also, in the manager's office, been working to kind of have this broader conversation with the county and the towns, and even sort of from a regional perspective about bigger regional investment. The basic thing is our transit plan, right? So the funding that's necessary to build the silver line, to build the red line, to essentially complete our transit division is a big dollar amount. And if you've been, maybe all have been following this conversation around the sales tax and the kind of neat conversation that we're having with the county and the communities in our region about kind of building support for that. We're working on that kind of concurrently, and everything that we're doing that Julie describes is in our minds part of that package. So the goal of that effort would be a sales tax that would not only fund the big transit projects, but would also be a supplementary way we could fund the kind of non-transit projects that we're describing. So that's a regional perspective. We're looking at what it means from the sort of central line of Connect Beyond at the multi-county scale. It's also kind of combining all the towns that have similar transportation plans like what Julie described. So it's not just us, it's everybody in the county. And if you put all of those pieces together with a shared funding source, the goal is that we would all be building the mobility network that we need to do to make this growing region successful. So just wanted to kind of place that kind of thinking in your minds and just that context that we're thinking about it from a city perspective and what can we fund with our own city resources, but we're also spending a lot of time having a conversation about those needs in the context of a larger transit mobility vision, and really moving and making a big impact and moving the dial on mobility in our region. That's not only these smaller transportation projects, but the bigger kind of transit vision. So more to come, but I just wanted to let you know that work is happening at the city as well as we think about our mobility investment in the next essentially generation. So with that, I think it's good to just have a conversation, let me get some thoughts and reaction.
Well, thank you guys very much. Often we'll kind of go around the room and see who has questions from the commissioners, but again, I like the idea of a conversation. So instead of me trying to direct traffic here, then just fire away, and if that gets a little bit messy, then we'll tidy it up. Let's start there, and see if we have a good back and forth.
I have a question about your blue block.
Yeah.
With your blue block, is there somewhere that it actually shows the various actual areas, roads, connections that those line up with the blue lines? Is it like, is this more that anybody can access and take a look at?
Yeah. We can get that for you. Yes, we can put this over streets.
Okay, yeah, because that would be, like, I have an idea of where those areas, but I just want to kind of pinpoint and make sure that what I think is what it actually is.
And what we're doing next, and Julian referenced the conversation we'll be having with council probably in January. We're taking all the work that Julian just described and kind of building a kind of an online public-facing tool that would go through all of this. That would do exactly what you're saying, is you'd be able to kind of zoom in and see your part of the community relative to this analysis that we did and what types of projects that might come out of that. So we're getting very close to having that kind of tool ready to kind of describe all the work that we've been working on over the last year.
You mentioned something there, so one question I had was, in terms of kind of soliciting community feedback, what are the avenues that you're taking to do that? I know, I believe I saw, well, I guess it was Katz, but, John Howard at some of the community area planning meetings, the one that I attended in person.
Mm-hmm.
But you guys, make sure you have a presence there as well. And if so, kind of what are you hearing? I'd love to hear what some of that feedback is, given that in those community area planning meetings, we're talking about, again, mobility as a piece of, a larger map for how Charlotte should grow and develop.
Yeah, we definitely had a presence at those meetings. We've kind of a little bit in teaming up next year when we're going to talk a little bit more about infrastructure at the next round of engagement, but we want to make sure that we're there and have an opportunity to engage with folks. And so we've definitely, it just depends on who's there and who's showing up. We're generally hearing about concerns about the sidewalks and just generally what our big plans are. A lot of concerns about how transit's going to be improved. So I think fairly typical in terms of feedback, and we've just been encouraging people to stay tuned, and if they're concerned with mobility infrastructure, that there's going to be a lot of opportunities to engage over the next year.
Yeah, just because I know that a lot of people have a lot of thoughts.
Yes.
Right? and some very productive, some probably not quite as productive.
And with if you go all the way back into the comprehensive plan work, like what Julian described, and we've been working hand in hand with planning, so the sort of transportation mobility conversation had been, interwoven with all the engagement that built to the comprehensive plan, and then we took that as a building block for the mobility plan, did some more engagement. Like there was a point in the mid part of that process where we had an online tool where people kind of exactly like the engagement that y'all did with the policy map, where people could go into their street, click on and say, hey, I want to see a sidewalk here, or this is an unsafe highway. All the detail. I think we got a couple thousand sort of points of data that were, that helps inform the analysis that Julian described. So it's been a several year process, and then what we're teeing up, what Julian described is when the next round of the community area plan process in the next year, which gets more into the infrastructure, we'll be using this work as a foundation to have, a conversation with the community to test, are we hearing, are we going in the right direction? Are we hearing, the true needs of the communities? Help us prioritize the work that we're doing. So I think we're hopeful that that'll be a great way to have that conversation around mobility. And to your point, I mean, it's always been important to not do that in isolation. It's got to be completely aligned with the broader conversation about people's vision for the character and quality of their neighborhoods and their community.
And then kind of in line with that comprehensive plan, the S&P, does it have kind of, I don't want to say a termination date, right? Well, the 2040 comprehensive plan was looking to 2040, obviously. Does this plan kind of have a similar horizon in terms of how far it runs, and then there'll be a reevaluation at that point? Or?
So it's aspiring to 2040, like the comprehensive plan, and then we're hoping to do regular updates every 5 years or so.
Okay, so it's very similar to.
Yeah.
Good.
I have a couple quick questions. So first, I really like that the plan was very inclusive. So I love that you guys included the accessibility piece, especially with us coming into 2040 and like just having that consideration. So my first question with that, when you talk about making our mobility more accessible, I've had some concerns about kind of the street lights and being on the zoning board. I know the street lights, the traffic lights are expensive. So with that being said, when it comes to accessible street lights, what does that look like from a budget perspective?
You're talking about like traffic signals.
The traffic signals, have the crosswalks with the sounds and,
Raptor, right? Raptor signals about the pedestrian crossing.
Oh, Hawk. You think Hawk?
The Hawk.
The pedestrian. Yeah, so there's, I mean, that's a great, it goes back to what you're bringing up, goes back to this point of like, there are very relatively small things that have real impact, right? So new traffic signals, have all the amenities of getting pedestrians across. You mentioned, we put in new pedestrian crossings where you've got a signal, a button that activates a signal in the middle of a block. We have, even our existing signals don't all have the audible notification or the pedestrian, all the advanced technology we have for the countdown, et cetera. So we're actually in the process of methodically going and updating all of our signals to have those capabilities. And so, back to this notion of strategic areas and lots of different pieces, we've documented every single we've got. We know what it has and doesn't have. We know where we have, where neighborhoods have requested new pedestrian crossings. So we've got all that mapped, and now the question is prioritization, right? Where do we start, and where, back to the strategic area sort of strategy, how would we, what's the right way to focus and collectively do a bunch of things that would have a real impact on a location. So, and to your question about budget, well, it sounds large, even a new traffic signal, depending upon the situation, is 500,000 probably at the most. That sounds like a big number, but it's really not relative to our ability to do projects. So, it's an example of, we had an area that needed a new traffic signal here, a new pedestrian crossing here, maybe some improvements to an existing signal, and all of those things would have real benefit from a pedestrian standpoint. That might be $2 million worth of stuff. Again, that's an achievable package of things that if we prioritized in a new way, we could do relatively quickly. So it goes back to a strategy we're still trying to test. We still need to make sure when we go out to the community, it would be really useful to have that conversation to say, if we did a bunch of these things, does that feel meaningful to the concerns and issues that you have? And that'll be a good way for us to test that. But our hope is when we can, so many things we can do pretty quickly. You guys are familiar with all the zoning discussions you have. There's lots of development that through our review of the zones. And from a CDOT perspective, we do this on every case. There's situations where their impact means we need a pedestrian crossing here. You need to put in this new signal. I mean, we're getting those kinds of things all the time. And having this information and having sort of a prioritized strategy in these areas, actually, we're hopeful that it'll make those conversations even kind of more efficient. That if you're in one of those areas, we've already identified a couple of these things, you're in a zoning or redevelopment project, we've got the ability to negotiate those investments on the private side. So it's not just public, it's private.
That's mine. And my second question was about microtransit. When you allude to microtransit, are you talking about the trolleys? What exactly is microtransit?
So it's a CATS initiative, so we're probably not the most expert group to talk about, but generally what it's speaking about is kind of integrating other types of transit with like our light rail and bus systems. So that could include something like rideshare apps, and I think they're actually considering a provider that would be providing microtransit in a similar way to how you would be calling for an Uber on your phone. So, and the idea with that would be integrated so that the fees and everything would be linked to you already having gotten on the bus. You get off the bus, if you're within a microtransit zone, then you can get a ride to your destination.
Yeah, and the next is Julian described, that might be a fun topic for this group.
Yeah.
At some point, to have CAPS come and talk about it, but they are, what's happening nationally with transit systems is, they use the word microtransit, but what it's really is on-demand transit access. And like Julie described, the way it works is you're at a station, you've gotten off that station through the transit agency's app, you've said, I need to get to my home, and there's a on-demand small vehicle system that is like an Uber, but in this case operated by a transit agency, is circulating and comes through that request on your phone to come get you. And it really is that sort of last mile issue, right? Like we've got so many places in Charlotte that are suburban that don't have, where you live or where you work is too far from a transit stop, a bus stop, or a light rail stop to reasonably get there. And so CATS is going to be piloting some of these, and there's some transit agencies. Dallas is a great example where they've implemented 30 or 40 what they call zones around all of their stations that have this capability where you get off that stop and you have the ability through that app. It's a seamless thing, like Julie described. So it's just like your own transit trip. You get off the station, that small vehicles there to pick you up and takes you, to where you work or to where you live. And so CATS is still just about to get there, but there's some great examples nationally that are doing this. It's successful, and it's a practical way to deal with that first last mile.
I think they're looking at it in the Valley neighborhood. Yeah. It's an interesting test case because there's a bus that goes through Hidden Valley. It takes something like 40 minutes or 45 minutes. It goes down every street, winds all through the neighborhood, and its ridership is on Sundays less than 5 people because nobody wants to go somewhere and it takes 45 minutes to get out of your neighborhood. Yeah. And so that's what they want to do. Like with the ability to get to the Sugar Creek light rail station, rather than having a bus driving around the neighborhood 24 hours a day. There's no lot of it.
Yeah, and again, since you brought it up, that's the way CATS would implement something like that is exactly that, where they've got a local neighborhood circulator system, and they obviously isn't quite providing the service that it is intended to. The cost of operating that just gets transferred to this microtransit strategy. And so the test would be, okay, if you have that more of a door-to-door service, that you live in Hidden Valley, you want to get to the Sugar Creek transit station, you're not waiting for that circulator, you can call it up and get a door-to-door service. That's the vision, and CATS, I think, wants to try to do that throughout their system.
Courtney, you're going to test that in the north end too, so they've kind of identified the little stations where you have to land in order to do that. So Looking forward to it.
Is that just library or bus station?
Plus,
Bus station.
but I do. What I've been told is they can identify like along North Frame Street, Statesville, and North China.
Okay.
It's also, I think it was there, some of those office buildings, these new office buildings where you can't get to the light rail station because it's across the railroad tracks. And so that's. Could I ask this one quick question?
No, I'm not.
So as I look at your blue blob map, it looks like a petri dish to me. But I can identify Independence, Central, Sugar Creek, Batesford, Tuckasegee, West, Independence, Wilkinson, all state-owned roads. So how do you think about, we don't actually control, the city doesn't control those roads, the county doesn't control those roads. How does that integrate, or how does that inform how you think about this work?
You're right, it can be a challenge, but I mean, there's still opportunities there, and we do hope to partner with NCDOT whenever we can. There are situations where they will allow us to contribute some of our funds. They call it betterments, so that maybe their standard doesn't meet our standard, but we can contribute money to get a planning strip and a wider sidewalk or a shared use path along that street. So there are opportunities there to partner. Typically, if the street is already there and there's no plans for widening, we might be looking at more opportunities behind the curb rather than doing stuff within the street. And I think the other part of that is those state roads are also a lot of the time big transit corridors. And so we need to be thinking about the local connections between neighborhoods along our streets and local streets, collector streets, to make sure that people are able to get to those hubs along the state roads so that they can then use transit from there.
But crosswalks and traffic lights, et cetera, so those types of pedestrian friendly strategic projects where we've got these hot spots, and it's on the state road.
Yeah.
And you're trying to get across West Boulevard, and it's a state road, that becomes a lot more complicated.
It does, I mean, but what I would say is there's a lot more partnership than people give credit to. So we work hand in hand with NCDOT. You're right, I mean, you caught it, right? There's a lot of our important corridors are state maintained corridors. And they have their own policies and rules by which they've got to follow. But we've got great examples of partnership. As Julian said, when they're doing investment on corridors, we can partner to get improved facilities. Again, sort of the fact that probably people don't know, I mean, all signals in the city we operate, even on state roads. So we have a partnership with them. So the kind of pedestrian, accessibility improvements we can do on those, we partner with them on new pedestrian crossings as well. So it requires more coordination. Certainly, they have their own rules to follow, but we've had lots of great success of having common shared goals. They are also learning and working with us more on understanding that there are parts of those corridors that are urban and in neighborhoods, and how we treat them should be different than when they're suburban or more like
Hours per hour.
Exactly. So we're not winning all the battles, but I certainly want the message to be that we work together, and we find a lot of common wins out of our collaboration. So.
Thanks.
I think on that note, this is more of a comment than a question, but as it relates to collaboration, I think one of the things that excites me the most in CDOT's collaboration with planning department, with all the community area planning, is and the fact that you solicit so much feedback and have a lot of jurisdiction through the rezoning process, right? Is that, and the one that comes to mind for me when I was at one of these community area planning meetings was that we are talking about place types in these meetings, right, for the most part. We have a couple of different specific areas. And there was one where they were talking about the intersection of the plaza and WZRs, right? And we're talking about place types. Do you want this to be neighborhood 2? Do you want this to be X, Y, or Z? And a lot of that feedback was like, it doesn't really matter what it is until this road is safe to cross. right? Like, we would love to see more density here. We would love to see all this, but that doesn't make crossing W.T. Harris any easier, any safer, and that's gonna be a little bit prohibitive. And so, is there a way that you're soliciting some of that feedback and trying to preemptively address that? Or are you waiting? Well, because the other thing too, I guess, is if the city comes in, right, the planning staff, and we change that so they call it an N2B or something, right? A neighborhood to try, or a neighborhood activity center to try and get more development, that kind of removes one of your abilities to work with developers because it's no longer going to require a rezoning, right? And so, how do you? I don't really have like I don't have to formulate this question, but how do you address
I'll start, you can jump in too. I mean, that's a great topic, and a great question, and why we've done everything we can to kind of be hand in hand with, the place action, the area plan process, and continue to go back to the comp plan, but I mean, as you guys know well, like in the part of the plan that describes all the characteristics of each type of place, right? There's a mobility section, and we work very hard to kind of say, okay, in this type of place, the character of our streets, the nature of our investment needs to be, like a neighborhood center, or if you're in a commercial area, we were intentional to kind of set that stage in the comprehensive plan. But what you described, again, is hopefully something that we will have further conversations as we go into these area plan meetings to talk about, so that we can identify, it helps us see things that maybe we don't see that guide the investment. The other thing I'll say, and Jill, you can jump in as well, but the last thing I'll say about the going away from the rezonings and the UDO and the kind of more by right development. And I'd be glad to come back and talk about this in more detail, but one of the things CDOT did with the UDO was we rewrote all of the transportation review processing guidelines, and we rewrote them so that they apply very specifically to by right development as well as rezonings. And so all the by right stuff that won't go through rezoning, there's a new process. It's called a comprehensive transportation review. And again, there's a whole topic we could, if you're interested, we'd be glad to come and talk through that in more detail. But it gets to your point, those projects, while by right, they would still go through CDOT full review. We've got a process that ties to our goals. And so you've got to meet certain expectations about pedestrian and bike facilities, about transportation investments for sure, but things like pedestrian crossings, filling sidewalk gaps, those kinds of things. So depending upon the scale of your development, your requirements are scalable to your project, but it gives us the tool that we didn't have before with the old zoning ordinance we had, and we specifically knew the UDO was going to this world where a lot of it was going to be by right. So we're like, okay, we need to create this tool to allow us to get the kinds of things that we're talking about. So I want to put a little plug to that so you guys are aware that even though a lot of development now is going to be happening by right into the UDO rules, we do have a very unique piece that was woven into the UDO that allowed us to get multimodal kinds of improvements with development as it comes in.
Yeah, unless Julie has something that's.
I was just gonna, no, you're good. I was just gonna add on, we feel really good about the work we did to create the comprehensive transportation review, and then also, within the UDO, we worked hard on the requirements that are gonna be tied to by right development. We also have a great policy framework, so if we feel like there are areas where our regulations or our CTR are not bringing us what we need out of development, there's still opportunities for us to continue to look at that. So this has been a huge lift, and as development is now going through this process, we have an opportunity to look at that and see how well it's working, and see if there are other opportunities for us to partner with development to really get the infrastructure that we need.
Just to follow on, this is Commissioner Shaw. Hi, just to follow on, and thank you. This is really eye-opening and helpful for those of us not in the weeds on this every day. But a follow-on to Commissioner Lindenthal's question. So obviously, an N2 development at the corner of Scaly Arkansas Boulevard is different than an N2 development I don't know, in the middle of center of Myers Park, right? In terms of the needs. And so I guess the pluses and minuses of the comp plan that UDO is that you had sort of put a blanket, I mean, yes, sidewalks and bike lanes and, tree pits and all of that is somewhat standard depending on, I'm sure, on the roadside size, but whether you need a pedestrian crossing or, some sort of other infrastructure might vary. And so I guess maybe this is an unfair question because you're only about 4 or 5 months into it, but how is that change going from the conditional rezonings to sort of the more blanket rezonings? How is that going for you all so far? I mean, are you finding that as you look, gosh, we would have been able to get X, Y, and Z if the zoning had been conditional, or are you finding that you're still able to achieve most of your goals on a project by project basis?
Yeah, okay.
No, I was just gonna say, I think that's a very fair question. I do think it's early for us to really be able to tell. That's one thing that we want to be doing over the next year or even 2 years is look at how development is actually getting constructed under these new regulations and under comprehensive transportation review. There's another piece we have, transportation demand management requirements within CTR for kind of higher density areas as well that really focuses on other tools outside of just infrastructure, like providing showers on your facility, making sure that there's facilities for storing bikes, providing incentives for employees, things like that, some programmatic pieces. And as development actually gets constructed, we're really curious how well that's working and how we can expand those types of requirements and programs going forward.
Sure.
That is, so I would say you raised probably the important question of the UDO from a transportation standpoint. I've been involved and negotiated many conditional rezonings, so I'm totally familiar with what you're saying. We get a lot of important stuff through that negotiation. And I was anxious, and maybe still am a little anxious to your question about, okay, are we really going to get what we have to get? So we're thinking about it, as Julian said, we're going to track it, and like Allison and the planning, everyone has said about the UDO, it's a living document, and so we anticipate the transportation part of that is living. But the jury is still out. And again, we did the best we could. We understood that was going to be a need. We had to create this thing that would be in the UDO to cover our bases on this less amount of conditional rezonings. So we don't know yet. Two things I would say on this: we weren't consistently before the UDO applying a kind of consistent approach to buy right. And I think you guys probably know this, but the city council and the zoning committee, it feels like you see a lot of rezoning, right? But that's a small tip of the iceberg of what's actually happening in the city of Charlotte. And so the notion of these guidelines that we've established kind of touching everything is a completely new bar, which nobody sees, but it's now real. And then the last thing I'd say about conditional rezoning is it got us a lot of great things, but it took a lot of resources, and it was sort of inequitable because certain neighborhoods that have the time and the expertise to bring a developer to the table and to negotiate the things they wanted.
Sure.
Only so many neighborhoods can do that, and others can't. And so, we felt like we were doing a lot of good things through those conditions. We were, but it wasn't equitable, and we didn't have the resources to touch the whole city. So the UDO raised the bar across the city. We use these transportation guidelines to do the same. We do lose out on some of the more detailed things that we probably would get through conditional, but to me that trade-off is the right trade-off because we needed to be comprehensive, we needed to be more equitable, we need to be more fair and consistent with developers because the way we negotiate on this project is different than the way we negotiate on that project, depending upon the neighborhood or context. And that, even from a development standpoint, that's not fair, it's unpredictable, et cetera. So I think the UDO holistically, raised the standards, made it more consistent, predictable. We try to do the same thing with your transportation pieces as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. I hadn't considered that, but that makes sense.
And those, by the way, is that when you're kind of part of that land development project process, when you're gonna have that review?
Yeah, so they go through, we'd love to, this is really in the weeds, you guys maybe don't want to go there, but we could talk through it in a whole separate session, but, yeah, you come in and through that development review process, kind of like we do with rezonings, but at the development review stage, we'll look at, okay, how many square foot of this, and how many, how much are you doing? It calibrates how much, kind of mitigation you've got to do. We've got kind of a menu that says, okay, you got to achieve X number of points based on your scale, and you can do a pad crossing, you can do a new signal, you can fill the sidewalk gap. So it sort of forces a conversation based on the unique needs of that area, calibrated to the scale of their development, and all that math and negotiation sort of predictably happens when a developer sort of submits their plans, for review and approval. It's I can keep going on because it's an interesting topic for me, but it goes back to the other interesting thing about conditional rezonings is you're negotiating those things, and sometimes years before the development actually hits the ground. So the developers sort of anticipating what they're going to do, we're sort of anticipating what the needs are. The better place to have that conversation is when they're submitting plans, when we know what's actually happening, when we know exactly how big their project is, and then we can have a real conversation with them about it. Otherwise, a lot of times the conditional rezonings, you're guessing, and many times they come back and rezone and amend, and it's even hard to kind of keep track of. So it's in our mind, it's always better to have that more detailed infrastructure conversation at the time of development rather than at the time of rezoning.
It's rather one that you'd like to do a little bit further into, then. All right, shifting gears a little bit, I believe the only other agenda item copy
Right,
community area plan update, right?
Yeah, so, won't spend a lot of time on this because I know several of you have been to workshops over the past month or so, and so you're pretty familiar with what we're doing. We've got 2 geographies left. We just finished one this past week, so we have 2 geographies left. But since we just had this presentation from CDOT staff, I will add on that we are, actively preparing for the phase 3 engagement, April through June timeframes, and working with these guys. So the first big piece was getting a lot of data from them. The next kind of task that we have, taking that data, producing maps, going back and having conversations and saying what's missing, what needs to be changed, and then preparing, the format or how we'll present that in the spring. Because as I've mentioned before, and as they alluded to, it's really kind of flipping the script where we're planning and setting the stage for our partners who will be the meat of the meeting. So just so that you all know that work is going on too. And we are, I think there's some, any comments, their folks are really good to stay and hear the conversation at a lot of the meetings. But we do, we take notes at all of the meetings and we share those notes with our partners, as well as put them up on the internet. So any of those comments that are related to other departments are shared with them as well to help them prepare. Other than that, that's all I had, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Good question.
Mm-hmm.
I am scheduled for the 30th, so that means that I would need to attend the training on Tuesday, next Tuesday, right?
This Thursday.
This Thursday,
This Thursday.
yeah.
Oh, this Thursday, okay. I would,
1 p.m.
Yeah,
Okay.
the basic.
Okay.
Is it the basement this time, or do we change it?
You know what, it might be easier, if you wouldn't mind just sending.
Yeah, I'll send it out.
It's just so you guys know, we'll send it to the full commission. So yeah, to Courtney's point, we have training for the East Inner this Thursday at 1 o'clock. And then Courtney, I believe you're signed up for the November 30th afternoon, Thursday afternoon at 4, and then Robin, you and Aaron are signed up for the December 2nd, 9 a.m. Where are those gonna be, Patty?
I'll have to check the locations, and you really only need to, okay.
So that's what-
East Inner
on Saturday, you all have it at Veterans Park.
Oh, okay, you meant those locations, yeah, I thought that was part, that's right.
Is that what you meant?
Yeah,
Or did you
yeah,
mean
the
training?
the
I'm sorry.
location of the actual. kind of-
Meetings, okay, yeah,
Yeah,
that
where
was,
south there's gonna be.
That was not for a couple weeks.
Yeah, that's gonna be that second week of December.
Charlotte Mecklenburg Library, South Park Library,
Okay, perfect. That's,
according to the,
and again,
that's not till the week of the 11th.
right, so we will not meet before that. We might.
we meet on the 19th.
Yeah, so we will not actually, this is our last meeting before the community area plans are out. So, we'll sit around locations, and I can follow that up with the spreadsheet as well. But just as a reminder, Aaron, to your point, the training for that was December 7th, that Thursday. With the virtual on Tuesday the 12th, an in-person on Thursday the 14th, and an in-person on Saturday the 16th. Aaron signed up for all of them, so that's exciting. And then RJ, you are signed up for the virtual on Tuesday and the in-person on Saturday. I think Doug was set up there as well. So I'll follow up your email, Kathy, with the spreadsheet, just so people can see what I signed up for. There's a good chance that I show up, not to facilitate, but just to participate in a couple of those as well.
Yeah, that was my other question, Kathy, so, I don't know what that area is called.
South, there's East Inner and then South.
So South Inner is my area, would you recommend for our areas that we participate not as facilitators, would that be more productive for you, or does it not?
It doesn't matter,
Okay.
and you really only need to attend the training if you want to do the
Right,
facilitation.
that was,
Yeah,
yeah.
because we understand it's like taking time out of your day, and it's kind of in the middle of the day, but, it's completely up to you when and where you want to do this.
And the training has to be in person.
Yes, it has to be in person.
And it's here, right?
Yes, it's here.
It's a lot of fun. I had a great time.
It's not very long, I mean, it's under an
About an
hour, probably,
Yeah.
By the time, yeah. Maybe 45 minutes.
Great. Any other questions for Kathy? Aaron? No? All right, well, I think we have reached the end of our agenda. We have Katie, who was at the full commission meeting yesterday, coming back in December to present to us more specifically on greenways. And then we have stormwater coming in January. Again, I've talked offline to Melissa and RJ about this, but as we get into late winter, early spring, we'd really like to focus a little bit more on some neighborhood representatives to get in. I think we've kind of hit the environmental and sustainability side of it pretty hard so far, and would like to focus on the neighborhoods as we move into the spring. So any thoughts on that are welcome. I'll reach out to some people. On that note, I believe we are wrapped up. I will take a motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn. All right, let's do it. Thank you guys very much.